Welcome to Formula One Espresso News. Today we're going to be leading with a story that changes everything about who's going to be racing where next year. Every single driver contract on the grid confirmed and laid out for you, and some of them will expire sooner than what you think. Also tonight, the 2026 rule change gets their first public backing from a team principal. Ferrari's technical director on just what the April break means inside Maranello, a McLaren driver who's been inside one of the best teams on the Formula 1 grid, tells us why he no longer wants to race in Formula 1. And while Italy's financial police have launched an investigation into Formula 1 drivers that could potentially end up in criminal charges. Wow, we've got a lot to discuss. Let's get right into it. So, there we go. Started off driver contracts. First of all, welcome. Hello, everybody. Formula One's official website has published every single driver contract status on the grid, and it spells out just why this summer has the potential to be one of the biggest silly seasons that we have ever seen. But before we start, a reminder from me, if you want to be kept up to date with all the latest from the world of Formula One, don't forget, you can hit subscribe to be notified when each of these shows land and be the first to know exactly what's going on in the Formula 1 paddock from, of course, the Corner Motorsport shed. Right, let's get into it team by team. Hello, mate, how are you? Just having a quick look at the chat, see who's here. So, format of the show is quite simple. I'll go through the news, we're open up to any discussion if there's any comments, and we talk through exactly what it means. The whole point of this is it's interactive, and the whole point of this is that I want you to be part of the show. So, let's kick off with the Constructors' Champions, and that is, of course, McLaren. Current world champion Lando Norris is confirmed through to at least the end of 2027. His teammate Oscar Piastri is locked down until at least 2028, so McLaren's foundation is one of the most solid on the Formula 1 grid. Mercedes, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. George Russell is officially only confirmed until 2026. Now, Sky Sports News understands that this deal extends further, but as we know, George has alluded to this during his interviews. It is performance-based. Additional years will unlock depending on the results from that Mercedes. Now, in a season where Mercedes have currently won everything so far, those metrics look likely to be hit, and that's something that George alluded to after the Japanese Grand Prix. But officially, right now, George Russell is only confirmed through to the end of this current year. Kimi Antonelli is also on a 2026 contract only. But given they've been on Mercedes' books since George has been there for years and Kimi's been on since the age of 12, it's going to be surprising if there was no longer some sort of driver contract. We've talked about this with Toto where Kim is tied in longer term with Mercedes, but unfortunately he can't actually leave the Mercedes group without a blessing. This is what George has been under. So even though officially it's 2026, I believe that Kimi is on a much longer contract. Red Bull, Max Verstappen, as we know, contracted through till 2028, but of course has those performance-based get-out clauses. If Red Bull don't perform, it's quite simple, Max can leave. Isaac Hadjar is on a one-year deal, 2026 only, so one season to prove himself, alongside, of course, the most demanding benchmark on the Formula 1 grid. Then we come on to Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton officially confirmed only through until 2026, though he said himself in November that he's got a pretty long contract. What this is led to believe is that Lewis Hamilton has contract extensions that he can invoke on his side rather than on Ferrari's side. Charles Leclerc is understood to be contracted until at least 2029, and again, that's got performance clauses locked in. A lot of these contracts have performance clauses because of the new regulations. Williams have Alex Albon confirmed through 2026. Carlos was signed on a 2-year deal that began in 2025 with options to extend beyond 2026. Both potentially free agents based on Williams' performance. That is another critical one. Racing Bulls, both Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad on 2026 one-year deals only. Aston Martin have Alonso confirmed him through 2026. And of course, they have Lance Stroll on a never contract, which is pretty much as long as his father runs the team. Confirmed for 2025 and infinity and beyond, according to the team's own announcement. Haas is the one that really interests me. Ollie Behrman, Esteban Ocon, technically need a driver confirmed for more than 2027. Both on deals that do not extend beyond this season as things stand. Behrman is, of course, still part of the Ferrari family. The talk is he's been lined up to replace Lewis, as we know, which when you look at his contract, almost mirrors Lewis. Then actually that makes perfect sense. But that also explains why we're getting some was speculation a bit about Esteban Ocon and his future. It seems like Haas, whilst they have a solid driver pairing in what they're happy with, don't actually have drivers locked in past 2026. Audi have Hulkenberg on a multi-year deal, though not necessarily behind 2026. And also, Gabi Bortolesso was also at least confirmed for this season. They remember signed when they were Sauber. They were signed on multi-year deals, but it did not say when those contracts were ending. So it's led to believe they are ending towards the end of this year. Alpine have locked down Pierre Gasly until at least 2028. Colapinto is on a one-year deal, 2026 only, so he's going to need to step up in performance. We've obviously got Paul Aron and Alex Dunn waiting in the wings at Alpine, and Flavio Briatore is not afraid to pull that trigger at all. Cadillac have Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez. They're both understood to be multi-year deals through till 2027 at least. So what does all of this tell us? Well, that leaves Hamilton, Russell, Antonelli, Hajar, Albon, Sainz, Lawson, Lindblad, Behrman, Ocon, Hulkenberg, Bortolesso, Alonso, Colapinto, all technically out of contract. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 drivers out of contract. Had to do the maths there. That is bonkers. Silly season isn't coming, it's already here. But the question is, who's going to kick off silly season, to be honest? What we got in the comments. So, Max leaves Red Bull and goes to Mercedes. George and the smooth operator, available seat, both Red Bull and Isaac, 4-star to Williams. Interesting. I do think that Max is the key to all this. I've said this many times. I think what Max decides will decide what the Formula 1 grids. If he stays, it goes one way. If he goes, it goes another way. Russell, Mercedes keeps kind of coming back to me. George seems very adamant that he's got this long-term contract. He seems very adamant that he's got this deal where he can actually stay in Mercedes for a long term. He can stay there for the foreseeable future. But when you look at it as well, for me, I keep going back to this with Toto. If Toto wanted to lock those drivers in, he would have locked them into long-term contracts. And I still believe that Mercedes will have a get-out on it. I don't believe for 1 minute Mercedes have no get-out in those contracts with George Russell. Kimi Antonelli, I still believe, is on his long-term deal. We saw it with Toto. He did this with George. So George was part of the Mercedes junior team up until literally last season when he negotiated that contract. So for me, it's a case of when he makes that move, Kimi, I think, is hell-bent on what Mercedes are doing rather than what Kimi wants to do. George has got a bit of his own freedom in there, but that also leaves him exposed a bit. I think that in the past, we would have said that Aston Martin was a destination for George if Max went there. I think with the troubles they got, would George go there? Makes you wonder, Red Bull, could it be a straight swap, I suppose? Red Bull were no longer playing the junior driver team, it seems to be. They seem to be quite happy to look at other options for them. We know that Carlos has got those old Red Bull ties, obviously, when he raced for Toro Rosso. If Williams have another bad second half of the season, they don't come back from the break on it. What happens then? Because I'm not entirely sure whether or not both drivers would stay. I think Alex Albon has shown tremendous loyalty to Williams, and I think that ultimately he deserves a place up. You've got Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly is a driver who literally has committed to Alpine. We're not entirely sure why. We don't know the reasons behind it, but ultimately you've got a situation where they're looking better with that Mercedes engine, but that second seat is looking pretty much up for debate. I think if Alpine carry on their performance, Pierre will be fine. McLaren look pretty settled. I don't think they go for Max. I talked about this one on yesterday's show, and I think it was last week as well. I don't believe that's the deal, even though GP's going there. So, Ollie Behrman, I think, is linked with obviously what Ferrari do. I think if Lewis stays at Ferrari, then Ollie Behrman will just carry on at Haas. I don't believe that Haas or Ollie Behrman want to change that at all. I think that's just more of a contractual thing. I think Ocon is potentially at risk if he gets beaten comprehensively by Ollie Behrman again. That kind of leaves him very vulnerable. So I think, for me, Franco Colapinto is really vulnerable. I think that the Cadillac drivers are safe for another season, but if Colton Herta gets that super license that he's so desperately craves, and he's probably on course to do with all of those free practice he's doing and what he's doing in F2, I think that Cadillac's long-term aim is to put Colton Herta, an American, in that car. I don't think anyone can be in any doubt. So that obviously puts a question mark over one of the Cadillac drivers. But I do believe they got this season and next season before they make that change anyway. I think all they do next season is promote Colton Herta to a reserve role anyway, once they make that call. Like I say, Esteban Ocon's got to be looking over his shoulder. Franco Colapinto's got to be looking over his shoulder. I think Audi will want to actually keep their two drivers. I don't think Audi want to change things. And I'm not too sure where the two drivers go. So I think that will be a market move which doesn't come about a lot. So I'd say Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso. How long does Fernando give it? When you look at what Fernando's really doing, you look at how he is. You look at, obviously, his off-track stuff. He's now, obviously, dad. Will Fernando give it more time? Will he give the Honda project more time? And will he say enough is enough? I talked about Lance Stroll last night. Is the move to GT Racing a sideways move to get Lance out? So that's another one for me. Let me know in the comments what you think. Max leaving Red Bull, I do think that there's a big move in Max. Like I say, I think that if he's going to go anywhere, it's going to be Mercedes, nowhere else. But interestingly, we're going to talk about another rumour with Max based off a fan survey when we get to the Ferrari part. Shameless plug there to stay tuned to the show. But yeah, next up, we're going to be talking about rules tweaks. So Monday's crunch meeting, as we know, produced actual results and something that's going to happen on track, although there is scepticism. But the Williams team principal, James Vowles, was the first voice out of the room to actually talk about these changes. Now, his verdict is quite simple. He says they were sensible changes. His exact words, the teams, the FIA and Formula 1 have done good work over the past few weeks to agree on these changes. So a quick recap for those who didn't catch last night's show. And, of course, a shameless plug that if you haven't caught last night's show, catch it because it's got loads of details on what these rule changes mean. So we've got the maximum recharge has been cut from 8 megajoules down to 7. Super clipping power raised to 350 kilowatts. Duration capped at around 2 to 4 seconds per lap. Drivers can push harder in qualifying and harvest less. Lift and coast problems been frustrating since Australia has been addressed. And for racing, the boost is capped at 150 kilowatts, which is a direct response, of course, to what happened to Ollie Behrman. The MG UK deployment is zoned, 350 kilowatts in acceleration, overtaking zones, 250 kilowatts elsewhere. It's making it more predictable, consistent, and potentially boring. That's the part I want to add. That's the bit which really worries me on this one. What else we got here? So linchpin seems to be not where the car's getting into stomach, right? A complete crap car, not competing for the mid to top. Yeah, exactly. I do think, quickly going back to the driver ones, I think that ultimately you've got drivers who can make the moves, so like Max Verstappen. But I also feel that you've got a situation where if the car's not performing, that's also an absolute must as well. Drivers will look for exits. Like I say, you've got Williams, potentially Aston Martin. Not that I don't think Fernando and Lance will go somewhere else, but you've got those options there in terms of what they do, definitely. So cars, drivers, both of those things will play a part in what happens with drivers. Going back to the rule changes, so race starts, get a new low-powered detection system, kicks in for Miami, it's on a trial basis first. So James Vowles has just talked about this quite openly. He talked about, this was at Silverstone where they were doing a filming day during the day today, so Williams have been out on track today. But ultimately, the sport have had to do something. The fans' backlash has been pretty immense, to be honest. They've had to do something. James Vowles has come out and backed it. Williams, I suppose, aren't really hugely affected by the regulation changes. What I mean is they got like Mercedes engine, but actually a lot of their issues is to do with weight, not these deployment, not these mapping. So I think they're a team who are quite safe in what they're saying because it doesn't really affect them at all. But I think that for me, I've still got concerns. I did a video on this one earlier. I think for me, we might be taking away the one thing that actually we've seen in Formula 1 this season, which is overtakes due to the way we're going to deploy the boost thing. I worry with what we call predictable. Now, the drivers have talked about having predictable. They've talked about they want the cars to be predictable. And I get that from a safety point of view. But predictable can also mean boring. It can mean stale. If the drivers know what's going to happen, they can defend a lot easier. And I don't for 1 second want the drivers to be in any risk. And I certainly don't want it to happen to Ollie Behrman, to happen to anybody else. But ultimately, I think that what we've got to look at, we've got a situation where if they're too predictable, it becomes like DRS zones. The things about DRS zones is we knew exactly where DRS zones were. So we knew exactly what was happening with the cars. We knew exactly where the overtakes were going to happen. The drivers knew when it was going to be deployed. It made it much easier to defend. You could literally save your battery. You could charge yourself up, ready to defend and counteract against the DRS. My concern with the regulations and the change we made yesterday is, are we going to see a return to that where actually the drivers know exactly what's coming and they can also prepare for that, which then means less overtaking, which ultimately means less on-track action. And when we haven't changed the actual cars, because we haven't changed anything to do with the engines, we haven't changed the 50-50 deployment, the ultimate problem we're going to have is the one thing that was making it interesting could now have had its wings clipped by what they're doing. So let me know your thoughts on that one in the comments, because I'm really intrigued on people's thoughts on this one, because this was one of the things the fans asked for. The qualifying, as I said in the video, absolutely agree. I think qualifying being more flat out, it's not flat out, of course, but more flat out is definitely a big win for the sport. And I do think from the safety point of view, absolutely, intermediate tyres, they're getting off the start, all those bits, they make perfect sense. But Yeah, let me know your thoughts on that one before we head into story 3, which is Ferrari and what they've been up to during the break. Quick drink. So, Ferrari talked about the break that never stopped. So, whilst the politics being played out, Ferrari's chassis technical director Sierra sat down with motorsport.com and he's been given a detailed conversation about actually what it means inside Maranello in terms of the April break and what they've been doing. And to take away his main headline from it, the more you run the car, the more you learn about your car. Now, he was clear that missing Bahrain and Jeddah doesn't change the actual development plan because these plans are made not week by week, they're made long in advance. You don't become more aggressive or more experimental just because you've lost a couple of weeks. But what the break does, it freezes your correlation. So what he's saying is you stop adding new data points from the track. But you don't stop working, you just go deeper into the data you already have. The biggest issue for all the teams is going to be Bahrain. Bahrain was really handy for the teams. We've had 2 weeks of preseason testing there. The teams have all of the new regulations running on that car. They had the tyre wear, they had the wind tunnel correlation. The thing about Bahrain is it would have given them a direct comparison to where they were in preseason testing to where they currently are now. And that's a really big loss for the team. Saudi Arabia, not so much, but Bahrain was the one where they were going to correlate what was going on in the wind tunnel. They were going to correlate with the updates they were bringing. They were going to make sure everything was working. They were going to redo the data, look at the data from pre-season testing, work in the factors, and away you go. Now, that is going to be a big loss to the teams that they're not going to get back. So I do expect some things to be maybe go a bit wrong with the development updates. We're in new regulations. We don't know what's going to work and what isn't going to work. We're not entirely sure, when the team brings an update, whether or not it's going to be successful. So for me, there's a real big question mark over whether or not the team's updates are going to be bang on the money, especially as we're going to change the way the cars are run with the regulation changes. They're going to arrive in Miami with no Bahrain benchmark to go against, no on-track correlation, and a set of new regulations which will inherently affect how the car runs on a track, which how much can you map that into a wind tunnel with the updates you've already committed to is going to be a really big question mark. Sierra was also direct about the SF26. The car spent over a year in development without actually being run on the track, as we know. So the learning curve from actual running is really steep regardless of the race calendar. Talked about the updates arriving in Miami. He talked about them being development, not necessarily big packages, so more incremental steps. That's new for Ferrari. They like to bring big packages normally, so he's talking about little and often. He also raised the cost reality himself, bringing parts to one race that you have to replace at the next race is really expensive, and no team can sustain that indefinitely. What they mean by this is what we've seen in the cost cap era. Now, when you bring a part in the old days, blimey, I'm sounding old now, but when you used to bring a part outside the cost cap, pre-cost cap, pre-2020, 22 sort of time, what used to happen is you bring an update. If it didn't work, you throw it in the bin, and you would work round the clock and you would get that update fixed. You would get whatever bits you needed back on the car. You can't do that in the cost cap. So what happens is if it goes wrong, as we saw with Mercedes, you can get yourself down a rabbit warren of trying to develop your way out of it, spend your way out of it, and waste a load of money chasing something that's not always there. You've also got to weigh up next season, as we've heard McLaren talk about. We've obviously seen Laurent Mecchi talk about with Red Bull. This is the sort of, if you go too hard in a season, like both of those teams did going toe-to-toe last year, they feel like they're paying the price early on this year because basically you spent your bank balance. Now, your bank balance is for the whole season, but it also affects next year's development. So at some point, the cars this year will be being developed for next year. Now, that's a lot easier because we're in a new set of regulations, and the regulations aren't going to change so much. So, therefore, this stuff's quite relevant. Last year, it wasn't so relevant because we had this complete sweep. And we've got this situation now where what happened is those teams spent their money. They come to this year, and they're struggling now with where the cost cap is, where they are in terms of their own development cycle, and also what happens then. Another part about this Racing 365 story was the 365 poll that they published this week that found nearly 70% of Formula One fans want Ferrari to consider signing Max Verstappen if Lewis Hamilton retires. Now, as we know, as I talked about earlier, Lewis Hamilton's deal runs until at least the end of this year. I don't think that's a deal for Ferrari. I don't believe for 1 minute that's on the cards. It feels like that's what the fans would like to see. I don't believe that Max has shown any sign to go there. I think that Ferrari would go number one status with Charles Leclerc and they would bring Ollie Behrman back in. That feels like that's the plan. That feels like that's what they're planning on doing once Lewis does call it a day. I think Lewis is inherently enjoying racing again. Hopefully these regulations haven't damaged him too much, because we got the flip side of this. We got drivers like Max Verstappen complaining about the regulations. We got drivers like Lewis telling us that actually the regulations were really good and he's enjoying it. So ultimately, I think for me, you've got a situation where some drivers may not like it, some drivers will be fine with it, and I think this comes down to car performance. I think if your car performs, the drivers will say it's been a raving success. If they don't, they're going to say absolutely not at all. Right, up next, Pato O'Ward. Formula One feels like too much like a show, is what he's been talking about. So this one landed last week towards the back end, but it's worth stopping on tonight because it does connect directly to everything we've been talking about over the last few days with regards to 2026 regulations and actually what drivers think of this. Because one of the biggest things that come out of these regulation changes is what the drivers have actually thought about the current regulations. Now, they don't get the vote, as we know, but they have been very vocal over what they're thinking. Now, Pato O'Ward is, of course, McLaren's IndyCar driver, and he is their Formula One reserve driver. He's been part of the McLaren setup since 2022. He's done a total of 5 FP1 sessions, and of course, he's been inside the Constructor Champions for the last number of years. Now, last week, he told Fox Sports that he no longer wants to race in Formula One. His words were that Formula One has made a mistake in how it's become now. It now feels more artificial. He also talked about what originally drove him, and that wasn't the fame, it wasn't the money, it was the cars. He said how impressive they were to drive and they were to watch, and then he delivered what was pretty much a knockout blow. So he said that every single year, a bit of that essence has been taken away. Just going back to that one in the chat. So Ferrari said they replaced 50% of the car coming to Miami. We know already it go, but Lewis doesn't seem like he's ready to head out. Yeah, exactly. I think Ferrari will replace, every team will bring a big upgrade before we go on to Pato. Ferrari will bring updates. Every single team has got an update coming. The question is how much of an update it's going to be. I think Lewis is enjoying racing, so I'm with you. I think Lewis will invoke that extra contract, and I think he'll stay. And I certainly don't think that Max Verstappen is a driver who's going to replace him. Going back to Pato, all over the place tonight. His specific issue is the boost button. Quite ironic, because I'm sure IndyCar pushed to pass as well. Not pressing the button to overtake someone as it happens artificially. He says it's not Mario Kart in direct reference to what we've been hearing. He's talking about racing himself. He said that IndyCar is currently the best racing class for a driver who genuinely wants to race wheel to wheel, because he feels that Formula One has become too much of a show. Now, that is, of course, a significant statement. It's also worth noting that Pato is, of course, an IndyCar driver, but it's someone who's within the Formula One network. He's driven the Formula One cars. He knows exactly what's happening on the Formula One grid. He's got people within there who he talks to, drivers, team, all the other bits. So for him, he wants to stay in IndyCar. Shameless plug from me. There is, of course, IndyCar coverage, including last weekend's race at Long Beach over on the website, which is, of course, www.coffeecornermotorsport.com. I do cover IndyCar. I don't tend to cover them in podcasts and videos because I don't feel my audience is particularly interested in that right now, but the website does particularly well. So if you are an IndyCar fan and you do like other sports, head on over there. There is also a look at the new Gen 4 Formula E car, which was at Paul Ricard today, if you are interested in racing as well, since we all seem to be talking about electric cars at the moment. So completely going off topic there. Welcome to the world of Coffee Corner Motorsport, where Terry's ADHD just sends him completely off topic. But yeah, so with regards to Pato O'Ward, I feel that there's a couple of things here. I don't feel that Pato is in a position to come into Formula One, because I don't believe McLaren, as we discussed, are going to be making changes. So I think there's an element of that as well. He's very settled in IndyCar. He's an absolute rock star in IndyCar, so it wouldn't make sense for him to make the switch anyway. So I think we've got to take the old grain of salt with that. We've got to take the old pinch of salt when some of these comments come out. I also think that he might just be jumping on comments. I feel that a lot of the noise about these comments are what's being talked about in drivers' interviews. So they're literally asking drivers to what their thoughts are on them, and that's leading them down this path of Mario Kart description and also what's going on. And I feel that they're being teed up is probably the right word to describe by the press, because the press know that by teeing them up, you can actually get a really good soundbite from a driver. So I think we've got to take that into context as well. My views on this are, I don't feel that there's many drivers on the IndyCar grid who will come across. Alex Palous, obviously multiple champion in IndyCar, just settled with obviously McLaren in terms of that contract dispute. He's a driver you'd like to see in Formula One. I'd like to see how he gets on. I don't think that's going to happen now because he's tied into Chip Ganassi, and obviously the contract, Chip Ganassi basically funded his McLaren contract fight. So when all that got settled, he's basically tied in with Chip Ganassi for absolute ages in terms of a contract. But yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of talk about whether or not Formula One is worth watching. I'm seeing a lot of people online saying, I'm going to turn off, I'm not going to watch it. For me, I feel that's a bit harsh after 3 races. I feel that with new regulation, we always get a team dominating in regulation. We always get a team that literally nails the regulation from the off. It always happens. It's no matter how many regulation cycles we've been through, no matter how many times we've seen this, one team would always be dominant from the off, and then the other teams will catch up. The million-dollar question is, when do the teams catch up, and how long does it take? That is what we're looking at currently, not that there isn't a dominant team. And I think my thing is, and I put this question to someone earlier, I didn't get an answer, so I'm intrigued to know what you think about this one. If we had 3 different race winners over the first 3 races of the season, so take obviously we've had Mercedes dominance. If we had Ferrari win a race, Red Bull win a race, McLaren win a race, if we had all these overtakes and 3 different winners, would the fans be then calling this regulation reset a success? Or would they still be talking about the batteries and the other bits? Because I'm really intrigued to think about where we would be if we had different winners. I think that the fans, not that they're wrong, because everyone's got an opinion, everyone's got a view on things, but I think also the Mercedes domination is skewing this quite a bit as well. We heard all this hype about Mercedes, they've come in and dominated, and then suddenly we've got a situation where we got Mercedes domination and a reset of regulations, and actually it doesn't look like it's any good. So is this we're jumping on the battery part because we want to complain about something because we don't want Mercedes dominating, or is it a genuine, we've gone too far on the electrification on that one? So for me, yeah, it's a really fine line between the two. So good point on the media leading these drivers into making statements they might otherwise keep to their friends group. But yeah, we saw this with Lando Norris as well. So Lando Norris did a interview with The Guardian, and The Guardian had a very strict list over what they could ask and what they couldn't. So it seems to be that when you've got a situation with some of the press as well, are they being muted? It's really hard because we've always had topics you can't talk about. When you've done a press conference, there are always topics where, yeah, the press officers will say, don't talk about this. That's happened for nigh on time. It's not something that's new. It's happened for years on years. So I'm not too sure stifling the drivers is what's going on. I think there's a conscious narrative being driven by Formula One where they're actively asking the teams not to be dismissive about it. We've got a situation where actually, Formula One, Stefano Domenicali came out last week. He talked very openly about the regulations, about what they mean, about what's going forward. He talked openly about this line. And it's interesting that Toto used a very similar language when he was talking to the press yesterday in his Mercedes briefing. They talked about guardians of the sport. It was almost like a mirror copy. It was almost like they'd been given a script to read to say, this is what we want you to say. And it feels like that's going to be passed on to the drivers. So I'm not expecting drivers to be very outspoken about new regulations when we get to Miami. I feel that the Formula One especially are trying to clamp down on what the drivers are saying to keep it that point of view. But for me, I think, different winners, really interesting comment there. Different engines, yeah. So again, if we'd had a Red Bull winner and we'd had a Ferrari winner and a Mercedes winner, would that have actually changed the regulation conversation? I don't know. We never know, will we? Ultimately, it's one of those could ifs, isn't it? But for me, I think that we still got a lot of work to do. I think the drivers will be in a situation where actually we don't know what they're thinking yet because they're being kind of restricted on what they're saying by the media. But with regards to Pato, yes, his comments are valid, but I also feel we've got to take it for what it is, which is there's not currently a way into Formula One for Pato as well. So maybe there's a bit of that going on. And he's not going to want to bite the hand that feeds him, is he? And have bad conversations about IndyCar, let's be honest about it. So this one has been quite funny. This one's also going on online about it was about a Formula One stars also being caught up in an Italian sting on prostitution as well. So the Italian media are having a field day. So Italian's financial police have now launched an investigation into Formula One drivers over unpaid tax on income earned during Grand Prix held on Italian soil. Yep, you heard that right. So this is the income that you should have paid. So the races in question, Monza, Imola, Mugello, now they obviously came back for the Tuscan Grand Prix during the pandemic season in around 2020. Now, under Italian tax law, foreign athletes competing in Italy are, of course, required to pay tax on the income they earn there. Now, the practical enforcement of this has been inconsistent for many years because it's a really complicated area. It's a really grey area in terms of what it is. Now, according to Racing News 365 and their sources, they've contacted drivers by letter requesting tax returns for the 2025 tax year, but they've also said they intend to go further back and, where legally possible, they will be settling unpaid taxes across multiple years. Now, interesting. This one is about they don't get a paycheck from the racetrack, but they're paid to perform in there. Now, this is very similar to NFL contracts. So, in America, NFL contracts, you have to pay tax on where the game is held, not necessarily on there. So, there'd be win bonuses, there'd be point bonuses. So, this is where it gets a little bit messy. So, ultimately, you may get a race performance payment, but you also will get sponsorship and you'll get everything else that's tied into being at that race. So, this is where you earn income because for that part of that paycheck, you are effectively racing in that country. And like I say, NFL do this with games. So games held in different states are required to pay different tax laws. I think California's one. They've been getting a lot of talk about this one. It's gone on for a number of years. So it happens a lot, especially in the United States. It's not a new concept. It's probably just the first time we've heard about it. It's something that I think has been handled behind the scenes and no one's really bothered about. It feels like it's going to affect drivers who've been in Formula 1 for much longer. So probably your Lewis Hamiltons, your Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen's, Carlos Sainz, drivers who've been around for a while. I'm not too sure whether or not they're just fishing for some extra money because they need to, boost the bank a bit, or whether or not there's genuine sort of whether or not they can do financial investigations. 50,000 is apparently the limit before it goes criminal. So in Formula 1 terms, that's probably not that good at all. In terms of what it means, sponsorship details are currently private. The drivers and the teams and the sponsors involved aren't going to want to open up that access to it. They're not going to talk about that one. They don't like to talk about that one. We don't hear a lot about drivers' bonuses at all. We tend to hear about what drivers' base contracts are. What we don't do is we don't hear about what their points, win bonus, performance bonuses, what X amount of sponsors pay them is. That's something we don't hear about a lot, and I think that's the bit which is probably going to make drivers, teams and sponsors a bit more edgy, because we know that drivers get a huge amount from off-track endorsements. It's not always going to be on-track actual activity. It's not going to be their main wages. They can earn just as much, if not more, from what they earn off-track. But I suppose for me, the big question is, as someone said, do we actually know that tax applied to that? I knew it was a thing in the States. I didn't know it applied to Italy at all, if I'm honest. I only know about it in the States. So I remember seeing a NFL player talking about how they have to pay a huge amount of tax when they compete in California, and it got me thinking about that one. So yeah, for me, it's one of those where I feel it would be settled quite easily. I don't feel there's going to be any criminal charges. I think it's one of those where there might be some payments be made, but the drivers' accountants will sort it. Let's be real here. How many drivers are that close to their accounts? They will pay someone to do it. So I imagine it's going to be something that's settled very much in the background. If it becomes a major issue, I'm sure F1 will step in. That tends to be what happens on that. So it tends to be what happens in terms of any sort of big contracts, or anything that involves like visas, anything where it involves a multiple number of drivers. You've also got the Drivers Association, which Alex Wirtz heads up. They can step in as well. So there are some things which can help the drivers on that one. But ultimately, I feel it's one that we're probably not going to hear too much about. It's going to get settled either way. Either the drivers will prove it's fine, or they will just prove their statements and then get a bill for it, which they just settle beyond. I don't feel that any driver can't settle their Italian tax bill. And it's only a couple of races, so I can't imagine it being an astronomical amount of what their salary is. And that's it for tonight's show. So absolutely massive thank you. Thank you very much for joining me in the chat. It's nice to see some people in chat. Nice to see some familiar faces. Don't forget, like I said, subscribe, like, not just to stay up to date, but also helps the channel grow. Like I said, I want more people to be in the chat. So a massive thank you if you've been in the chat tonight. I really appreciated actually having some people to talk to, not just me talking in the shed. But yeah, so contracts have been laid out, rule changes have been confirmed. McLaren Insider walked away from their Formula 1 dream. Ferrari is playing a long game. And as someone's just put in the chat, their tax accountants are going to be earning the big money because the Italian finance police are coming after the Formula 1's paddock wallets. Miami can't come soon enough. I mean, in terms of news, it's really hard work at the moment trying to get news. The teams have come back to work, it seems, this week. We're starting to get some more news in, which is great. It feels like we've had so many weeks off. There's literally just been cannon fodder after cannon fodder of stories that probably would never have seen the light of day on that one. So apologies for that one. I'm trying my best with the news we got. Race week will soon be here, and we'll be starting to talk about cars, stuff on track, and much, much more exciting stuff. So I'll be back, obviously, tomorrow night, live here on YouTube at 7:30 p.m. I'm obviously Terry. This is Coffee Corner Motorsport, and you've been listening or watching, depending on what platform you listen to this to, on Formula 1 Espresso News. I'll catch you tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone.